In frozen Chicago, a starving boy shares his last food with a lost girl eating trash. One act of kindness will trigger betrayal, scandal, and a battle for truth that shakes a billion-dollar empire. This is the miracle of Chicago. Before we start, like, subscribe, and comment where you're from. The wind that tore through Chicago's south side that November afternoon didn't just bite, it carved. Noah Carter felt it slice through the holes in his gloves as he dragged a plastic bag stuffed with empty bottles behind him. Each one was worth 5 cents. He needed at least 40 to buy bread, milk, and maybe, if luck smiled, a piece of chicken to split with his mother, 9 years old. And he already knew the arithmetic of survival. His sneakers, 2 sizes too big, donated by Mrs. Chen from upstairs, squelched through slush that soaked his socks. The grey hoodie hanging off his thin frame was drenched, heavy with melted snow. But Noah didn't stop. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant feeling the gnaw in his stomach that had been his constant companion for 2 days. Grace hadn't eaten in 3. She pretended she wasn't hungry, pushing her portion toward him with trembling hands, and that smile she wore like armor. Noah knew. He always knew. He turned onto 47th Street. Passing Salvatore's Italian restaurant, the smell of fresh pasta and tomato sauce wafted through the ventilation grates, a cruel reminder of everything he couldn't have. His stomach growled viciously. He quickened his pace, eyes fixed on the cracked pavement. That's when he heard it, a sound so small he almost missed it, a hiccup of a sob, swallowed and smothered, coming from the alley beside the restaurant. Noah stopped, the rational part of his brain. The part that had learned to be suspicious, careful, alert, told him to keep walking. Alleys meant danger, but something else pulled him forward. He set down his bag and moved toward the narrow passage where industrial dumpsters formed a barrier against the wind. And there, wedged between 2 metal containers, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her blonde hair was matted with dirt, tangled and stiff. The pink dress she wore, once pretty, Noah could tell, was torn at the hem and stained with mud. She shivered so violently that her small body seemed to vibrate. In her hands, she clutched the remains of a hamburger, half-eaten and retrieved from a discarded takeout tray in the trash. Noah felt something crack open in his chest. "Hey," he said softly, crouching down slowly so as not to startle her. "You okay?" The girl lifted her face. Her blue eyes were red-rimmed and swollen from crying, cheeks streaked with frozen tears. She stared at him with a mixture of fear and desperate, wordless hope. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Noah whispered, trying to smile even though his lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. "Promise!" She didn't answer, just kept holding that pathetic burger like it was the last thing in the world. Noah swallowed hard. In his hoodie pocket was half a peanut butter sandwich, wrapped in wax paper. The bakery lady had given it to him that morning out of pity. It was all he had until he could buy food. But looking at this child, lost, starving, terrified, there was no question. He pulled out the sandwich and held it toward her. "Here, it's better than that. It's clean, I swear." The girl looked at the sandwich, then at Noah, and slowly, so slowly, let go of the burger. Her small, trembling hands reached for the offering. She took a tentative bite, then another, and another. Within seconds, she was devouring it like she hadn't eaten in days. Relief flooded through Noah, followed immediately by worry. She was clearly in shock. He pulled off his hoodie, leaving himself in just a threadbare long-sleeve shirt, and draped it over her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl swallowed the last bite and looked up at him with those huge, haunted eyes. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Ellie." Noah noticed something glinting at her neck, a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant engraved with the initials EV. "Ellie," Noah repeated, his mind racing. "Do you know where you live, where your family is?" She shook her head slowly, confusion clouding her face. I don't remember. I was in a car and then everything went dark. And when I woke up, I was alone. I was so cold and hungry and..." Her eyes filled with tears. "I want my daddy." Noah felt a knot tighten in his throat. He glanced back at his bag of bottles, then at Ellie, and made his decision. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "You can't stay here. I'll take you somewhere safe." Ellie hesitated, then placed her tiny hand in his. It was like ice. Noah hoisted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and began the walk home. His own body now exposed to the brutal wind, but he didn't care. As he carried her through the darkening streets, past boarded-up storefronts and clusters of men huddled around trash-can fires, he looked up at the grey Chicago sky and whispered a prayer. "God, I don't know who she is, but she needs help. And if you can use someone like me, someone who's got nothing, then use me, because everybody deserves to be saved. Everybody." He didn't know, in that moment, that his prayer would change not just Ellie's fate, but his own, forever. When Noah pushed open the door to their apartment, Grace was in the kitchen trying to fix the stove that had broken for the third time that week. At the sound of her son's urgent voice, she dropped everything and rushed into the tiny living room. She froze. "Noah," she breathed. "Who is this child?" Grace Carter's hands were still damp from scrubbing someone else's floors when she knelt beside the couch where Noah had carefully laid the little girl. 3 houses she cleaned, 6 days a week, and still the rent was late. Still they ate once a day if they were lucky, but looking at this child, this stranger trembling beneath their threadbare blanket, Grace didn't hesitate. I found her behind the Italian place," Noah said quickly, his teeth chattering now that he was down to his thin shirt. "She was eating out of the trash. She's freezing." Grace touched the girl's forehead. Cold as stone, the child looked up at her with those enormous blue eyes, and Grace saw something that made her heart lurch, a desperate trust, as if she knew instinctively that she was finally safe. "Sweet Jesus," Grace murmured. She stood quickly, grabbed the warmest blanket they owned and wrapped it around the girl. "What's your name, honey?" "Ellie," the child whispered. Grace hurried to the kitchen and started making soup with what little they had. Potatoes, carrots, a chicken bouillon cube. The gas flame flickered weakly, threatening to go out. She coaxed it back to life with practiced patience. Noah sat beside Ellie, holding her hand. "Do you remember anything? Your address, your parents?" Ellie shook her head, eyes glazing with confusion. I was in a car with Miss Sandra, and then, a man," he was yelling. "And then I woke up somewhere dark and loud. And then I was walking and I couldn't find—" Her voice broke. Noah squeezed her hand gently. Grace returned with a steaming bowl and helped Ellie sit up. "Slow, baby. Your stomach needs to adjust." Ellie obeyed. Taking small sips gradually, the violent shaking subsided. Color began returning to her cheeks. Grace noticed the necklace, delicate, expensive. She gently pulled it from beneath the girl's dirty collar. "V," she read aloud. "Ellie V, what's your last name, sweetheart?" But Ellie just shook her head, eyes distant. Grace and Noah exchanged a look weighted with unspoken worry. This child wasn't homeless. The dress, though filthy, was designer. The necklace was real gold, and there was something in her bearing, a refinement, an education that spoke of privilege. "Noah," Grace said quietly while Ellie finished the soup. "This little girl is missing. Someone's looking for her." "I know," Noah agreed, "but we can't just throw her back out there, not until we figure out who she is." Grace sighed, running a hand through her hair. They could barely feed themselves. How could they care for another child? But when she looked at Ellie, so small, so scared, so lost, the answer was obvious. "She stays tonight," Grace decided firmly. "Tomorrow we go to the police. But right now we make sure she's safe and warm." 23 miles northeast, in a glass tower that pierced the Chicago skyline like a steel needle, Alexander Vaughn stood at the window of his corner office and stared at nothing. 41 years old, CEO of Vaughn Tech Industries, personal fortune estimated at $4.7 billion, and absolutely powerless, his daughter had been missing for 4 days. The timeline was burned into his brain. Tuesday, 3:17 p.m. Sandra, the nanny, was driving Eleanor to ballet class. They stopped at a red light in the West Loop. A man with a gun wrenched open the door, shoved Sandra onto the pavement, and drove off with Eleanor still strapped in her car seat. The car was found 2 hours later, abandoned in an empty lot on the south side. Eleanor was gone. Alexander had mobilized everything. FBI, private security, every law enforcement contact he had, Marcus Stone. His head of security and former Special Forces operator coordinated the search with military precision. $5 million reward. Eleanor's face on every news channel, every billboard, every social media platform. 4 days of silence. Alexander's ex-wife, Diane, was sedated in a hotel suite across town, barely functional. They'd been divorced for 3 years, their marriage a casualty of his obsession with work. But Eleanor was the thread that still bound them, the only pure thing in his calculated, strategic life. The intercom buzzed. Marcus's gravelly voice filled the office. "Mr. Vaughan, we have a report." A child matching Eleanor's description was seen in the south side. "We're verifying now." Alexander's heart slammed against his ribs. South side? What the hell would she be doing there? "Unknown, sir, but we're mobilizing." Alexander grabbed his coat and ran for the elevator. Behind him, screens flickered with search grids and news footage, the technological arsenal that had failed to bring his daughter home. In a luxury apartment in Gold Coast, Vanessa Harlow poured herself a glass of Merlot and watched the news coverage with carefully neutral expression. Diane's younger sister, 35 and perpetually in her sibling's shadow. Vanessa had arrived at the Vaughan mansion as soon as Eleanor disappeared, playing the concerned aunt, embracing her devastated sister, shedding well-timed tears. But privately, she'd been making phone calls. Discreet inquiries to certain lawyers about guardianship, about trusts, about what would happen to Eleanor's inheritance if the child was never found. Now, watching the breaking news segment about a possible sighting, Vanessa's jaw tightened. The brat was alive, which meant her contingency plans were worthless. She took a long drink of wine, mind already recalculating. If Eleanor survived, Vanessa's path to influencing the Vaughan fortune narrowed considerably. Unless she could find another angle, another weakness to exploit, she set down her glass and reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the name she wanted. Rick Monroe. A private investigator who specialized in delicate matters. The line connected, "Rick, I need information on someone, everything you can find, and I need it fast." The 3rd District Police Station smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Officer Davis, a 28-year veteran with a gut that strained against his uniform, looked up from his desk as Grace approached the counter, Noah and Ellie trailing behind her. "Help you, ma'am." His tone was perfunctory. "Bored. I found a lost child," Grace said quietly. "We'd like to report it." Davis reached for a form. "All right, description." Grace started to speak, but the moment Davis looked past her at Ellie, his entire demeanor transformed. His eyes went wide, the pen slipped from his fingers. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. He lunged for the phone. "This is Davis at the 3rd. I have Eleanor Vaughan. I repeat, I have Eleanor Vaughan," the station erupted. Within minutes, squad cars with sirens wailing converged on the building. FBI agents in tactical gear materialized seemingly from nowhere. Private security in black SUVs blocked off the street. News vans screeched to a halt, reporters spilling out with cameras and microphones. Grace instinctively pulled Noah and Ellie close, overwhelmed by the sudden chaos. Flashbulbs exploded in their faces. Questions were shouted from every direction. "How did you find her? Where was she? Is she injured?" And then the crowd parted. Alexander Vaughan strode through the mass of bodies like a man possessed. Tall, imposing, dressed in jeans and a cashmere sweater he'd clearly thrown on without thinking. His hair was disheveled. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were wild with emotion. "Ellie!" The name came out raw. Broken, Ellie's head snapped up. Her face transformed, memory flooded back. "Daddy!" She tore away from Grace and ran. Alexander dropped to his knees and caught her, crushing her against his chest as violent sobs racked his body. He buried his face in her hair, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, whispering her name over and over like a prayer. "You're okay. You're not hurt. Oh, my baby. My Ellie, I thought I'd lost you forever. I'm okay." "Daddy!" Ellie cried, clinging to him. "Noah saved me. He gave me food and kept me warm and took me to his house. Him and Grace took care of me." Alexander looked up, tears streaming down his face, and finally saw Noah. The boy stood beside Grace, wearing clothes that were obviously too old and too worn, thin, pale, hands scratched from digging through trash, but his eyes, those honey-brown eyes, held something Alexander recognized instantly. Pure goodness. Alexander stood slowly, still holding Ellie, and walked toward Noah. For a long moment he just stared. Then, voice thick with emotion, he said, "You saved my daughter." Noah swallowed hard. Intimidated by this man's presence, I just did what was right, sir." Alexander's eyes squeezed shut. Fresh tears spilled over. He reached out his free hand and gripped Noah's shoulder. "You don't understand what this means to me. What you've given me," his voice broke, "you and your mother gave me back the only thing that matters, and I will never forget that. Never." Grace stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Vaughn, we didn't do anything extraordinary. We just took care of her like anyone should." Alexander looked at Grace, really looked, saw the exhaustion etched into her face, the unhealthy thinness, the worn-out clothes, saw a woman who had so little but still opened her home and heart to a stranger. He took a deep breath, something shifting fundamentally in his chest. "No," he said firmly, "you did everything. You saved the most important thing in my life, and starting today, I'm gonna take care of you too." Noah and Grace stood frozen, unable to process what he was saying. Marcus Stone efficiently orchestrated their exit through the back of the station. Away from the media frenzy, Alexander insisted Noah and Grace come with them to Vaughn Tower. He wanted to understand everything that had happened, wanted to thank them properly. In Alexander's office, he ordered food brought up immediately. Grace and Noah sat awkwardly on a leather sofa that probably cost more than a year of their rent. Ellie refused to leave Noah's lap, her small arms wrapped around his neck. "Tell me everything," Alexander said, settling into a chair across from them. Grace recounted the story, how Noah found Ellie in the alley, how they'd cared for her, how they'd recognized her from the news. Alexander listened, his throat tight, watching the easy affection between his daughter and this boy who had nothing but gave everything. When Grace mentioned making soup with what we had, Alexander understood the depth of their sacrifice. They were struggling to survive themselves over the following days. Alexander moved with quiet determination. He purchased a house, a real house, 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, in a safe neighborhood, and put it in Grace and Noah's names. No mortgage, no strings. He scheduled appointments with the best doctors at Northwestern Memorial for Grace, overriding her protests. He arranged enrollment for Noah at Westbrook Academy, one of Chicago's most prestigious private schools. When he drove them to see the house for the first time, a white 2-story with blue shutters and a small yard, Noah climbed out of the car slowly, as if moving through a dream. He walked to the front door, touched the new paint, looked up at windows that weren't broken. Then he sank to his knees on the grass and wept. Grace dropped beside him, holding him as they both cried. Alexander watched from the driveway, Ellie's hand in his, feeling something crack open in his carefully guarded heart. For the first time in years, his money had done something that actually mattered. 3 months felt like 3 lifetimes. Noah navigated the marble hallways of Westbrook Academy with careful steps, still not quite believing he belonged there. The uniform, navy blazer, crisp white shirt, khaki pants, felt like a costume. Around him, kids chatted easily about ski vacations and summer homes, throwing around references to things Noah had only seen in movies. But there were bright spots. Tyler Morrison, a red-haired kid with freckles scattered across his nose like stars, had befriended Noah on day 1, Tyler's parents were professors, solidly middle class by Westbrook standards, and he seemed genuinely unfazed by Noah's background. "Dude, you literally saved a billionaire's daughter," Tyler said as they walked to the cafeteria. "That's the coolest origin story ever." Noah smiled, grateful for the acceptance. Jasmine Rodriguez was another unexpected ally, a brilliant, no-nonsense Puerto Rican girl who topped every class and had no patience for the school's subtle hierarchies. She'd simply sat down at Noah's lunch table one day and declared, "Anyone who treats you like you don't belong here is an idiot. You earned your spot. They just had rich parents." But not everyone was kind. Brandon Whitfield, son of a real estate mogul who competed with Alexander in several business ventures, had made Noah his personal project. The bullying was never overt. Westbrook was too refined for that. It was whispered comments, strategic social exclusion, little cruelties delivered with prep school sophistication. "Charity case," Brandon muttered just loud enough for Noah to hear as they passed in the hall. His friends snickered. Noah kept walking, jaw tight. Tyler grabbed his arm. "Don't let him get to you." "I'm not." But the words still stung. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Grace sat in a sterile examination room while Dr. Patel reviewed her test results. Alexander had insisted on accompanying her despite her protests. Now he sat beside her, a steady presence. "Mrs. Carter, you have early-stage tuberculosis," Dr. Patel said gently. "Left untreated, this would have become very serious, but with proper medication and nutrition, your prognosis is excellent." Grace covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. Alexander reached over and took her hand without thinking. "You're going to be okay," he said quietly. Grace squeezed his hand, unable to speak. In that moment, something passed between them, unspoken, fragile, but undeniably real, over the following weeks. Alexander found excuses to visit Grace and Noah. Sometimes he brought Ellie, sometimes he came alone, claiming he wanted to check on Grace's progress or see how Noah was adjusting to school. They'd have dinner together, Grace cooking simple, delicious meals that Alexander insisted were better than anything his private chef could make. One evening, after Noah and Ellie had gone to play video games in the living room, Alexander helped Grace wash dishes. Their shoulders brushed, their hands touched under the warm water. Grace pulled away first, flustered. "Sorry, Don't be," Alexander said softly. They stood there, inches apart, the air between them charged. Alexander's gaze dropped to her lips. Grace's breath caught. From the living room, Ellie shrieked with laughter. The spell broke. They both turned away, smiling awkwardly. But something had shifted. Something neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Vanessa Harlow received Rick Monroe's report in an envelope at a coffee shop in the West Loop. She opened it eagerly, scanning for ammunition, but page after page came back clean. Grace Carter. Impeccable work history, no criminal record, glowing references from every employer. Noah Carter, excellent grades despite adversity, beloved in his old neighborhood, never in trouble. Vanessa slammed the folder shut, frustrated. They were nauseatingly perfect. Then she saw the footnote. Subject Grace Carter has outstanding medical debt of $47,000 from emergency treatment in 2022. Account sent to collections, possible civil suit pending. Vanessa's lips curved into a slow smile. Not a crime, not a scandal, but an opportunity. She made a phone call. Within days, she'd purchased Grace's debt for $30,000. Now she was technically Grace's creditor. Power, Vanessa had learned, came in many forms. She arranged a meeting with Grace under the pretense of discussing charity work for families in need. Grace, naive and earnest, accepted enthusiastically. They met at Café Bellevue, an elegant establishment where the pastries cost more than Grace used to make in a day. Grace wore her best dress, still obviously modest, and looked distinctly uncomfortable among the designer-clad clientele. Vanessa, impeccable in Chanel, greeted her warmly. They talked about the foundation, about helping others. Then Vanessa gradually introduced poison. "Grace, I'm concerned about something," she said, voice low and sympathetic. You're in a very delicate position right now, Grace frowned. What do you mean? Well, you must know that Alexander is a very powerful man, and people around him, they talk. They create perceptions. Perceptions about what? Vanessa leaned in. There are rumors, Grace, rumors that you might be getting close to Alexander for the wrong reasons, that you're using your son and Alexander's gratitude to take advantage financially. Grace went pale. I would never. How could anyone think that? I know, Vanessa said with false empathy. But you have to understand, their world is brutal. A poor woman, suddenly living in a nice house, all expenses paid by a billionaire. People will talk, especially since it's obvious Alexander has feelings for you, feelings that go beyond gratitude. Grace felt tears of humiliation prick her eyes. I'm just trying to protect you, Vanessa continued. Maybe it would be better to keep some distance from Alexander, for your own reputation, for Noah's sake. Grace left that meeting shattered. Grace began pulling away, and Alexander felt it like a blade between his ribs. Her text responses grew shorter. She declined dinner invitations with vague excuses. When he brought Ellie over to play with Noah, Grace was polite but distant. Avoiding eye contact, Alexander didn't understand. Everything had been going so well, that moment in the kitchen when they'd almost kissed. He'd thought she felt it too, but now she seemed determined to put walls between them. He wanted to ask what he'd done wrong, but feared the answer. Noah noticed the change in his mother. Why are you being weird with Alexander? He asked one night. I'm not being weird, Grace insisted, stirring pasta with unnecessary force. You are. Did he do something? No, sweetheart, I'm just busy. But Noah knew his mother too well. Something or someone had gotten into her head. Vanessa's next move was more calculated. She needed to ensure that the distance between Grace and Alexander became permanent. To do that, she needed to manufacture evidence of Grace's supposed opportunism. She contacted Devon Ortiz, a 26-year-old hacker she'd used before for discrete projects, for $15,000. Devon created a fake email account nearly identical to a legitimate address for Grace. Differences so microscopic they'd escape casual notice. Then he forged emails, backdated and embedded in server logs that would appear authentic to anyone not conducting forensic analysis. The emails were damning. The plan is working perfectly. Alexander trusts us completely. Just a few more months and we can ask for more. I need to be careful. Alexander is falling in love. This is perfect. The more emotional he gets, the easier it will be to manipulate financial decisions. Noah is doing excellent work with Ellie. The girl adores him. This is our guarantee of permanent access to the fortune. Vanessa also hired a corrupt accountant to alter financial documents, creating fake receipts showing transfers from Alexander to Grace totaling $380,000. Far more than the actual costs of the house, medical treatment and school. Simultaneously, she leveraged her contacts in media to plant stories. Tabloids and gossip sites began running headlines. Grace Carter, savior or opportunist. Poor woman used son to infiltrate billionaire's life. At school, Tyler showed Noah the first article during lunch. Noah read it, color draining from his face. Brandon materialized with his crew. Always knew you and your mum were frauds, he said loudly. Scammers. That's a lie, Noah shot back. Then why is it everywhere? My dad says your mum's a professional con artist. Tyler stepped between them. Shut up, Brandon. Brandon shoved him. You're a sucker if you believe them. Jasmine appeared, facing down Brandon fearlessly. You're pathetic. You're attacking someone because you're jealous he has more character than all of you combined. But the damage was spreading. Teachers began looking at Noah with suspicion. Parents complained to the administration. Grace saw the reports and collapsed. Mrs. Holloway, the community center volunteer who'd become her friend, rushed over when Grace called in tears. How can they lie like this? Grace sobbed. How can they destroy our lives? Because someone has a lot to gain from keeping you away from Alexander, Dorothy Holloway said grimly. We need to find out who. Vanessa delivered her fabricated evidence directly to Diane. Diane was in the Vaughan mansion, still fragile but functional. When Vanessa walked in with the folder, Diane's face was drawn. "You need to see this," Vanessa said, her voice heavy with false reluctance. She placed the documents on the table. Diane read them, hands beginning to shake. The emails, the receipts, the timeline of manipulation. "Oh my God," she whispered. Memories of Eleanor's kidnapping flooded back. The helplessness, the terror, maternal instinct overrode reason. She grabbed the papers and stormed into Alexander's office. "You're being played," she screamed, slamming the documents onto his desk. "That woman is using you, using our daughter." Alexander snatched up the papers, face going white. "Diane, what are you talking about? Look, you've been paying her massive amounts, and these emails. She's been planning to manipulate you this whole time." "This doesn't make sense," Alexander said, but his voice wavered. "Grace would never—" "Wake up! She tricked you, that hero son of hers, probably involved in the kidnapping from the start. Maybe they planned everything. Noah was 9 years old. How could he— "Kids are used in cons all the time," Diane insisted. "You're too smart to fall for this, but you're blind because you've fallen in love with her." Alexander froze. Diane saw confirmation in his face. "You are in love, and she knows it. She's using it against you." "Against our daughter," Vanessa called Alexander that evening, her voice carefully concerned. "I hate to tell you this, but I did some investigating into Grace's background. She has massive debts she never paid. She's been sued multiple times. There are records showing she tried to sue previous wealthy employers, falsely claiming harassment to get settlements. All lies, all fabricated." But Alexander, already shaken by the emails and pressured by Diane, began to doubt. The voice inside him screaming that Grace was genuine grew quieter, drowned out by fear and apparent evidence. Alexander showed up at Grace's house the next morning at 10 o'clock. He didn't call first, didn't text, just appeared on the doorstep looking like someone else entirely. The CEO in full armor, cold and unreachable. Grace opened the door and immediately knew something catastrophic had happened. "Alexander, what's wrong?" He brushed past her without asking permission. "We need to talk." Noah emerged from his room, sensing the tension. Alexander dropped a folder onto the kitchen table. "Explain this," he said, voice like ice. Grace opened it with trembling hands. Inside, the forged emails, the altered financial records, the tabloid articles. She went pale. "I don't know what this is. These emails aren't mine. I never wrote this. Really, because they came from your email account." "I don't have an email account," Grace cried. "Alexander, you know me. You know I would never do this." "I thought I knew you," he said, each word a blade. "But maybe I was just a blind fool." "This isn't true," Grace was sobbing now. "Please, someone is lying. Someone's trying to hurt us." "Why would anyone do that? What possible reason?" Grace had no answer. She didn't know about Vanessa, didn't know about the conspiracy. All she knew was that the man who'd become essential to her life now looked at her like she was garbage. Noah ran in. "What's happening?" "Mom, why are you crying?" Alexander looked at Noah, the boy he'd come to love like a son, and felt his heart tear in half. "Noah, did you know about the plan?" "What plan?" Noah shouted. Confused and terrified. "What are you talking about?" "The plan to manipulate me, to use my daughter for money." Noah stood frozen as if he'd been punched. "I saved Ellie," he screamed, voice breaking. "I saved her because she was hungry and cold and scared. I didn't even know who she was." "Or you're a very good actor," Alexander said coldly. Grace threw herself between Alexander and Noah. "Mr. Vaughan, you can believe whatever you want about me, but do not blame my son. He's a child, a good, pure child who's never done anything but help people." Alexander clenched his fists, warring with himself. Part of him screamed this was wrong, that Grace and Noah were genuine, but the evidence, the fear, the familiar sting of betrayal were too strong. "I want you to stay away from me and my daughter," he said finally. "I'll let you keep the house. I'm not cruel enough to throw you out, but everything else ends here. No more visits, no more contact. We're done." "Alexander," Grace whispered, shattered. "Please." But he was already walking out. The door slamming behind him with the finality of a coffin closing, Grace collapsed, sobbing so violently she couldn't breathe. Noah stood motionless, tears streaming down his face in silence. "Mom," he whispered. "He thinks we're monsters. He thinks I used Ellie." Grace pulled him into her arms, both of them crying as if the world had ended, and in many ways it had. The next 3 weeks were hell crystallized. The media stories intensified. Reporters camped outside their house, shouting invasive questions. Someone spray-painted "scammers" on their door in red. Noah was expelled from Westbrook Academy, the director. Ms. Hutchins summoned Grace to her office. Given the scandal and pressure from parents, it would be best for everyone if Noah studied elsewhere. "He did nothing wrong," Grace protested. "You believe lies. We need to protect the institution's reputation," Mrs. Hutchins said, unable to meet her eyes. Grace lost her job at the community center too. The administrator stammered excuses about optics and unfortunate circumstances. They became pariahs. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. Kids who used to play with Noah now threw rocks at their windows. Noah stopped leaving the house. He locked himself in his room, spending days crying. Replaying the moment Alexander called him a liar, Grace tried to hold it together, but was falling apart. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The stress reactivated her tuberculosis. The cough returned. Violent and bloody Mrs. Holloway found Grace collapsed in the bathroom, surrounded by blood-stained tissues. She called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed acute pneumonia complicated by reactivated TB and severe malnutrition. Grace was in critical condition. Noah stayed at her bedside, holding her cold hand, aging years in weeks. At 10 years old, he learned what injustice really meant. Alexander Vaughan was drunk at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when Marcus Stone walked into his office without knocking. "Sir, we need to talk." "Not now, Marcus." Alexander's words slurred slightly. The whiskey bottle on his desk was half empty. "It's about the Carters." Alexander's hand tightened around his glass. "I don't want to." Marcus threw a thick file onto the desk. "The emails are fake, all of them." The world stopped. Alexander stared at the folder, unable to move. Marcus continued, voice steady but grim. "I hired an independent forensic digital analyst. The emails attributed to Grace Carter show clear signs of spoofing. The headers were manipulated. The email address was falsified. There are microscopic discrepancies in the domain. Timestamps were retroactively inserted, technically sophisticated, but definitely fake." Alexander's hands shook as he reached for the file. "The financial records were also altered," Marcus went on. "The actual amounts you transferred to Grace correspond exactly to the cost of the house, her medical treatment, and Noah's school, not a penny more." Alexander felt the floor disappear beneath him. "There's more, sir. I traced the origin of the falsification. Everything points to one person who had access to privileged information and motive to harm the Carters." "Who?" Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. "Vanessa Harlow." 3 miles away, Mrs. Dorothy Holloway was conducting her own investigation. With the determination of someone who'd lived through McCarthyism and wouldn't tolerate injustice, she'd collected written testimonials from 23 people who knew Grace and Noah personally. Every single one attested to their character. She'd recruited Dr. James Wu, a computer science professor at Northwestern, who analyzed the emails pro bono and confirmed they were forgeries. She'd even tracked down Rick Monroe. The private investigator Vanessa had hired, Rick, drowning in guilt and alcohol, had kept copies of everything. Insurance against Vanessa betraying him. He handed it all over. Now Dorothy sat across from Diane Harlow Vaughan in a private room at the mansion. Methodically presenting evidence, Diane read through the documents, hands trembling, the forensic analysis, the testimonials, the timeline proving logical impossibilities in Vanessa's narrative. "My God," Diane breathed, tears spilling over. "If this is true, we destroyed innocent people." "There's still time to make it right," Dorothy said firmly, "but you need to act fast." Alexander sat in his office, the damning evidence spread before him. and felt reality cave in. The emails were false, the receipts were fabricated, everything had been orchestrated by Vanessa. He grabbed the trash can and vomited, guilt too physical to contain. Marcus stood by silently. When Alexander finally looked up, his face was destroyed. "What have I done?" Alexander whispered. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, what have I done?" "You were manipulated by someone you trusted, sir. It's not entirely—" "Yes, it is!" Alexander roared. "I had instinct telling me they were real, and I ignored it. I chose to believe lies because I was afraid of being fooled again, and I destroyed people who never did anything but love me." That night, Alexander didn't sleep. He relived every moment with Grace and Noah, every smile, every conversation, every time Ellie hugged Noah with absolute trust. They were real. They'd always been real, and he'd destroyed them. At dawn, he fell to his knees in his office and prayed for the first time in 20 years. "Please, God, please give me a chance to fix this. Please." Meanwhile, Devon Ortiz sat in a coffee shop across from Marcus Stone, sweating despite the air conditioning. "I can put you in federal prison for years," Marcus said calmly, "or I can offer immunity if you testify against Vanessa Harlow." Devon's hands shook. "She said it was to protect the family from scammers." "I didn't ask questions. I should have." "Yes, you should have. Now you're going to make it right." Devon nodded. He provided complete logs, every communication with Vanessa, every instruction, every payment. Rick Monroe did the same. Between the 3 investigations, Marcus's, Dorothy's, and Samuel Chen's legal analysis, they built an ironclad case. When Marcus delivered the complete dossier to Alexander, the evidence was irrefutable. Vanessa Harlow had systematically destroyed the Carters' lives through forgery, manipulation, and conspiracy. Alexander read it all, each page another weight crushing his chest. Then he stood up, grabbed his coat, and said the only thing that mattered: "I need to ask for forgiveness." Alexander drove to the hospital at 5 in the morning. He sat in his car outside for 2 hours, rehearsing words that would never be adequate. At 7, Noah emerged from the entrance. He froze when he saw Alexander's car. Alexander got out slowly. He looked devastated, unshaven, red-eyed. Rumpled clothes, Noah instinctively took a step back. "Noah, please!" Alexander's voice cracked. "I need to talk to you and your mother." "She's in the hospital," Noah said coldly. "You put her there." Alexander flinched as if struck. I know what I did, and I came to ask forgiveness. Forgiveness won't heal her, won't give back what you took." "I know, but please, give me 5 minutes, just 5. Then if you want me gone forever, I'll go." Noah hesitated. He wanted to slam the door in Alexander's face, but something in the man's eyes, genuine anguish, crushing remorse, stopped him. "Come on." Grace was awake, reading a book Dorothy had brought. When she saw Alexander enter, her whole body tensed. He stayed in the doorway, not daring to come closer without permission. "Grace." "Noah." "I discovered the truth, all of it." He held out the folder. "The emails were fake, the receipts were altered, everything was orchestrated by Vanessa Harlow to destroy you, and I believed her instead of believing you." Grace took the folder with shaking hands. She read through tears, the forensic analysis, the proof of their innocence they'd waited weeks to see. "How long have you known this?" Her voice was barely audible. "Since last night, and every second since has been torture." Silence hung heavy. "Alexander," Grace's voice broke, "you don't understand what it was like, losing everything, watching my son suffer, being called a con artist, a liar." Alexander dropped to his knees beside her bed. "I don't deserve forgiveness, I know that, but please let me try to fix this. I'll expose Vanessa publicly. I'll restore your reputations. I'll do everything in my power to repair the damage. Please, just give me a chance." Noah watched his mother, his own eyes full of tears and confusion. He was deeply hurt, but saw genuine pain in Alexander's face. "Mom, what do we do?" Grace looked at Alexander, really looked. Saw the man she'd fallen in love with, destroyed by guilt and regret. saw someone who'd made a terrible mistake but was willing to take responsibility. We'll need time, Alexander. We can't just forget. The pain is too real. I understand. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness, just a chance to prove I still care, that I always cared. Grace nodded slowly. Then prove it. Show the world we were innocent. Protect people from being destroyed like we were, and maybe someday we can rebuild something. Alexander felt overwhelming relief. Thank you. Thank you. 2 days later, Alexander convened a press conference at Vaughan Tower. Every major Chicago media outlet was present. He stood at the podium, Diane beside him in solidarity. Grace and Noah waited backstage, reluctant but present to witness. Good afternoon. I'm here to make a public statement about Grace Carter and her son Noah Carter. Cameras focused intently. Weeks ago, I accused these people who saved my daughter, who opened their hearts to us, of being con artists and manipulators. I based my accusations on evidence presented to me, but that evidence was false. Completely false. Murmurs rippled through the room. Grace and Noah Carter are innocent, they always were. The emails attributed to Grace were forged using sophisticated spoofing techniques. The financial records were altered. All of this was orchestrated by someone close to my family, Vanessa Harlow, with the goal of destroying the Carters' reputation and driving them away from us. Gasps of shock. Vanessa acted out of jealousy, ambition and malice, and I failed to protect people I loved. I let fear blind me. As a result, I caused unimaginable suffering to Grace and Noah. I'm here not just to clear their names, but to publicly ask for forgiveness. They didn't deserve what they suffered, and I'll dedicate every resource necessary to ensure truth is known and justice is served. Diane stepped forward. I also want to apologize. As a mother, I was desperate to protect my daughter, but in the process, I hurt people who were never a threat. Grace and Noah deserve our gratitude, not our cruelty, and I am deeply, deeply sorry. At a downtown hotel, Vanessa watched the press conference live. Her face went chalk white. Her body began to shake. No. She tried calling lawyers, contacts. No one answered. Within 2 hours, the FBI arrived. She was arrested on federal charges: forgery, criminal defamation, conspiracy to commit fraud. The cameras captured everything. Vanessa in handcuffs, being led to a police car while flashes exploded around her. Her trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2 million in restitution to the Carters. But worse than legal punishment was social annihilation. Friends abandoned her. Her country club membership was revoked. Her reputation was permanently destroyed. In prison, she spent days in a small cell, replaying her choices, seeing how far she'd fallen. For the first time in her life, Vanessa understood what she'd done. Understood that she'd destroyed innocent people not out of necessity, but pure cruelty. A week later, Alexander asked Grace and Noah to meet him and Ellie at the park where they used to play. They agreed, hesitant but willing. When Ellie saw Noah, she ran crying and threw herself into his arms. "Noah, I missed you so much. Why did you leave?" Noah hugged the little girl, also crying. "I never wanted to leave." "Ellie, never." "Then don't go again, promise." Noah looked at Alexander uncertainly. Alexander approached slowly. "Noah, Grace, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I caused pain that will take time to heal. But I want you to know, you never left my heart, not for a second, and if you give me a chance, just one chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of your trust." Grace looked at him, heart divided. "Alexander, it's not about worthiness, it's about trust, and that takes time. I have time, all the time you need." Noah looked at Ellie, clinging to him, like she feared he'd disappear. He sighed. I don't forget what you said, how you made me feel, but—" he took a breath. "But I also know everyone makes mistakes, and maybe we can try to start over." Slowly, tears ran down Alexander's face. "Thank you, Noah, thank you." Grace finally smiled. "Small, tentative, but real. Slowly we'll rebuild, one step at a time. There, In that park under Chicago's sun, they began the long road to healing. Chapter 9. Spring arrived in Chicago. Like an answer to prayer, Grant Park was in full bloom. Cherry blossoms painted pink against blue sky, tulips forming yellow rivers through green grass. Rows of white chairs faced a simple altar decorated with wildflowers. Grace Carter and Alexander Vaughn were getting married. Noah, now 11 and noticeably taller, walked his mother down the makeshift aisle. He wore a simple but elegant suit, a gift from Alexander. Though Noah had insisted on something understated, his hand rested on Grace's arm with touching pride. Grace was radiant in a white dress that was modest but beautiful. Her hair, restored to health after a year of proper treatment, shone in the sunlight. Her eyes held not just happiness, but genuine peace. Alexander waited at the altar with Ellie beside him as maid of honor. The 7-year-old wore a pale pink dress, blonde curls bouncing as she clutched a basket of rose petals. When she saw Noah, she shouted, "Noah!" and ran to hug him before the ceremony even started. The guests laughed warmly. About 80 people filled the chairs. Family, close friends, the community that had supported the Carters through their darkest days. Diane sat in the front row, smiling genuinely. Beside her was Mrs. Halloway in an extravagant floral hat, Mr. Martinez and his wife Carla, Mrs. Chen, Tyler Morrison and his family, Jasmine Rodriguez with her parents, Marcus Stone, Dr. Wu, Samuel Chen. Everyone who'd helped reveal the truth and restore justice. Reverend Margaret Collins, pastor of the community church where Grace now volunteered, conducted the ceremony with warm simplicity. The vows were personal, not traditional. Alexander looked at Grace, tears already falling. "Grace, you taught me what it means to truly love, not conditional love based on perfection, but love that forgives, rebuilds, chooses to believe even when it's hard. You saved me from an empty life where I had everything and nothing. I promise to spend every day being worthy of this second chance. I accept you not just as my wife, but as my partner in making the world better with all my heart, soul, and life." Grace's voice wavered but held firm. "Alexander, you showed me that redemption is real, that people can change, grow, fix their mistakes. You gave me not just material security, but something more precious. Respect, partnership, genuine love. I promise to continue being light in your life, always reminding you of what really matters. I accept you with all your imperfections, because in them I see the most beautiful humanity. Let's live fully, together. I pronounce you husband and wife." They kissed to an explosion of applause. Ellie and Noah jumped with joy. The reception happened in the same park, simple tables with white linens, wildflowers in jars, food catered by Mr. Martinez, who'd insisted on doing it for free, though Alexander paid him generously anyway. During the reception, Alexander made a toast. "Just over a year ago, I was blind. I had money, power, success, but I didn't have life. Grace and Noah didn't just save my daughter. They saved me too. They taught me that true wealth isn't in a bank account, but in love, integrity, compassion. I'm the most fortunate man in the world, not because I have billions, but because I have you." Everyone applauded. Deeply moved, Grace responded, "Alexander, you saved me too. You showed me it's possible to dream again, that good people still exist, and that miracles happen when we open our hearts." Noah and Ellie danced together awkwardly. Laughing, she insisted, "Someday I'll marry you." Noah laughed. "Ellie, you're my sister now. Siblings don't marry." She sighed dramatically. "Fine, but you'll always be my favorite hero." 2 years later, the Noah Carter Foundation was thriving. The 3-story building stood in the South Side, intentionally located in the community Noah came from. Not a wealthy neighborhood. The foundation offered full scholarships for underprivileged children, free medical treatment for families without resources, assisted housing programs, and psychological support and mentoring. Grace worked as program director. She'd completed an accelerated nursing degree that Alexander funded. Now she used that training to coordinate the Foundation's health services. Noah, at 13, was the Foundation's official face, not as propaganda, but as genuine recognition. He'd given talks at schools, conferences, community events. One day, Noah was invited to speak at the United Nations about youth, compassion, and social change. The UN auditorium in New York was packed. World leaders, diplomats, activists, journalists. Noah, wearing a simple suit, approached the podium. He didn't use a teleprompter, spoke from his heart. "My name is Noah Carter. When I was 9, I collected bottles from trash in Chicago to buy food. One day, I found a lost girl who was hungry and cold. I didn't think about rewards. I didn't think about consequences. I just thought, she needs help. So I helped." Pause. Absolute silence in the room. That choice completely changed my life. But what I learned wasn't that helping brings material rewards. It was that being human is the most important thing we can do. It doesn't matter how much we have or don't have. We can always choose to see each other. We can always choose compassion. My mother taught me that. She, who had nothing, always shared everything. And today, as I stand here, about to start high school in a school that once seemed an impossible dream, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life helping people, because that's what makes us worthy. Not money, not power, but the compassion we choose to practice every day. Standing ovation. World leaders applauding a 13-year-old from Chicago's South Side. Video of the speech went viral globally. Noah became a symbol of hope, proving that genuine goodness can come from anywhere and transform the world. 3 years later, 10 years after the rescue, Noah was at Harvard studying medicine with a focus on public health. He wanted to be a doctor for underserved communities. Closing the circle completely, during summer break he returned to Chicago. He visited the alley where he'd found Ellie, now marked by a commemorative plaque the city had installed. In this place, in 2015, Noah Carter, age 9, found Eleanor Vaughan lost and afraid. His compassion saved a life and inspired a city. May this marker remind us, kindness transforms worlds. Ellie, now 16, beautiful and confident, stood beside him. She was preparing to apply for medical school too, inspired by the brother she loved. "Sometimes I still can't believe all this happened," Ellie said softly. "Me neither," Noah agreed. "But it did, and it taught me that it doesn't matter where we come from or what we face. What matters is who we choose to be." They looked at Chicago's sky, where stars were beginning to appear with twilight. "Noah, thank you for saving me, for never giving up, for being you." Noah hugged her. "No, Ellie, thank you, because you saved me too. You showed me it's worth believing in miracles." Grace and Alexander watched from a distance, hands intertwined, a complete family, a family they'd almost lost but fought to rebuild. "He's going to change the world, you know," Grace said. "He already has. He changed mine, and that's everything." Noah stayed alone in the alley a few more minutes after Ellie left. He touched the bronze plaque with his fingers, feeling the cold metal. He remembered the 9-year-old boy shivering with cold, collecting bottles, stomach empty but heart full. Remembered the scared girl eating trash. Remembered sharing the last piece of food he had. He remembered the pain. Accusations, humiliation, devastating injustice, but he also remembered the healing, forgiveness, reconciliation, love rebuilt. Noah closed his eyes and whispered to the universe, "Thank you for everything, for the blessings and the trials, because both made me who I am." A gentle breeze passed, carrying the scent of flowers and summer's promise. Noah opened his eyes and smiled. He knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice that freezing afternoon so many years ago, that kindness is always worth it, that love always wins, and that miracles don't come from nowhere. They're born every time someone chooses to see humanity in another and act with compassion. Did this story touch your heart? Share it with someone who needs to believe in miracles. And tell us, have you ever practiced an act of kindness that changed a life in the cold heart of Chicago? A boy with nothing in his pockets but everything in his heart saved a life and changed his own destiny?